What's going on, everyone? Bran here from Bloody Breakdown, and today we're going to continue on with our path of best horror of each decade. So, if you've been following the channel, you'll know that I've already covered my personal favorite horror of the 1980s and the 1990s. We're going to keep that energy going here with best horror of the 2000s. So anything from 2000 to 2009, that's what we're going to be taking a look at here today. Just want to give everyone the same warning, I guess. Just a heads up. Obviously, with movies, it's subjective. So this is just my opinion. But I would love to hear what you all think down below in the comment section. Let me know your thoughts on the best horror of the 2000s. So just like the 80s and the 90s, how I went through year by year, I picked out a couple of honorable mentions and my pick for best movie of that year. We're going to stick to that format. Seems to be working fine. So let's jump right in and begin with 2000. And of course, we will kick things off here with an honorable mention. So first off, we have, of course, Final Destination. And this one was really groundbreaking. Let's be perfectly honest with ourselves. It's a new take on the Grim Reaper itself, which is like one of the oldest ideas of a monster in history. Is it not? I mean, it is death. It is the very thing that we fear. Even if there's some other monster or whatever in some of these films coming at us, it's really death itself that is so very scary and so questionable. So this thing worked so well. It spawned an incredible franchise. And I'm even hearing that it's a possibility that this franchise could be popping back up again. So I guess eyes peeled for that. But, Devin Saw, I'm a big fan of his work. This movie was really groundbreaking. And, you can't deny the success of the franchise. So, there's if there wasn't for a certain movie we're going to be talking about here in a minute, this one could have possibly been my favorite horror film of 2000. But it is an honorable mention, and I definitely think it deserves some kind of discussion if you're talking about the best horror of the 2000s. So let's go ahead and move on here to our next film. It is another honorable mention, and this is Ginger Snaps. Now, this is another one. This is one that it took me a long time to actually sit down and watch this movie. I was already a big horror fan by the time the 2000s rolled around. However, I never got around to checking out Ginger Snaps up until, I don't know, a few years ago, honestly. And I really had to kick myself in the ass for missing what is essentially a really awesome werewolf flick. With a really cool central story about these two outcast sisters. And I've never really been too big on werewolf flicks. Maybe that's why I passed this one by in 2000. But I got to tell you, even not being a big fan of werewolf flicks, which I mean, some are okay. I'm not saying I dislike all of them, but on the whole, they're not really not my bag. Ginger Snaps is a completely different thing, though. I really enjoyed it. And I definitely thought that it had to be at least an honorable mention for this year. So we'll move on. Final honorable mention. And you guys know I love Scream. Absolutely love it. Scream 1 and 2 were on my list in the 90s for the best film of 96 and 97. Now, I love Scream. I love Scream 2. But when you start getting into 3 and 4, that's when things get a little the quality lessens, in my opinion. Not that I don't like Scream 3. I mean, it's here as an honorable mention. But I just can't really give Scream 3 film of the year in the genre of horror when you've got Final Destination, when you've got Ginger Snaps, and when you've got the next film I'm going to be talking about, which is the movie of the year, IMO in 2000. So I love Scream. And I'll say this. I know this is the one, Scream 3, that gets the most hate, I think, based on what I've seen out of the entire franchise. But I love Scream 3. I do. I know it's Scooby-Doo-ish. I know it's a departure in many ways from what Scream and Scream 2 brought to the screen. Um, there's a different feel to it. The character is a little bit different. But at the end of the day, I got to tell you, I absolutely love this film. Um, the opening kill is mind blowing for me every time, considering I guess I won't spoil it even though it's 21 years old, but the opening kill is a character I thought that still had legs to go for several more movies, given the backstory. And I absolutely love the showdown at the end between Sid and the killer. Chef kiss, love it. But unfortunately, Scream 3 cannot be the 2000 movie of the year in the horror genre because that belongs to American Psycho. I mean, this movie is fantastic. It's a cult classic. It's been memed to death. Even though it predates, I guess internet as we know it today. Not an internet in general, obviously, but as we know it today. But man, this movie is a real mind fuck. I got to tell you, I absolutely love the Patrick Bateman character. And this is a really interesting look at the 80s and that scene and the young men who were wealthy in this era, and it really does take a look at them. And I gotta tell you, it's one of those films that when you get done with it, you have to question what you just saw and question what was real and what wasn't. And I love that type of film that really makes you think, even after the credits roll, about what you've seen, or what you've saw. And I just absolutely love it. And looking at all the movies that came out in 2000 in this particular genre, this one really is just a bright, shining example of what really good horror looks like. So, gotta be my pick, best horror movie of the year in 2000. As we move on to 2001, and I only have one honorable mention for this year. 2001, maybe not the best year for horror as far as like the numbers go. I didn't see a whole lot that I was really, really intrigued by. But the two that I got, I really think are stand-up films. So this is 13 Ghosts. Most of you probably are familiar with this, especially if you're a fan of Scream, which I know a lot of you on this channel are. I do cover it a lot. Matthew Lillard is a part of this one. And this one's also just insane. As a matter of fact, I won't say too much about this one because I feel like maybe there are some people that haven't seen this. I don't want to say too much about it. But yeah, it's it's a wild ride. Pretty gory, pretty crazy, and I definitely felt like it should be at least an honorable mention. And I really feel like if you haven't seen this thing, you should probably go check it out. 13 Ghosts is my honorable mention for the year 2001, which will bring us, like I said, not a lot on this year, which will bring me to my movie of the year in 2001, Jeepers Creepers. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking before you even say it. I get Victor Salva is a abject piece of garbage. I agree with that sentiment. He is a piece of garbage. But just to be perfectly honest with you, I do possess the ability to separate art from artist. And I got to tell you, this movie was great. Now, when it comes to horror, you talk a lot about franchises. And I'll say this, never again have they been able to replicate what they did with this original film, which tells me it wasn't Victor Salva, who was a big genius behind this. I think it was, the actors and actresses that were a part of this film. I think a lot went into it, but Jeepers Creepers 2 and especially that shitbag 3 have never been able to live up to this original. I do hold the original in pretty high regard as far as horror goes. Just a really scary, ominous film that takes you on a really cool ride, upping the ante every so many minutes in this thing. So it's definitely my favorite horror movie from the year 2001. I think it was the only horror film that came out in 2001 that I actually saw when it was new. And it scared the shit out of me. I recall having to walk home after this film, and yeah, that wasn't fun. So it did a real number on a I think 14-year-old Bran at the time. So it's got to be my pick, 2001 best horror movie of the year. As we move on into 2002, and some honorable mentions here, we'll start out with a prequel, if you will, to The Silence of the Lambs. This is a remade version of Manhunter. For those who are a little bit more familiar with the Hannibal franchise, but I do prefer Red Dragon to Manhunter. Anthony Hopkins is Hannibal Lecter. He's an amazing actor. Ed Norton does just an incredible job in this thing. You've even got Philip Seymour Hoffman, who we lost a couple of years back. Pretty tragic. The guy was really talented. But I mean, this entire cast. I mean, you can actually see it here on the screen on this poster. But just an incredible cast. I felt like it was even better than Hannibal, which was the original follow-up to Silence of the Lambs. We all know what a big hit critically and financially Silence of the Lambs was. But this one's a prequel. I've really always liked the character of Will Graham, so it was cool to see that character actually there with Hopkins' version of Hannibal Lecter. And I even really enjoyed the show, the relationship between Hannibal and Will Graham. So, yeah. Other than Silence of the Lambs, this is my favorite film in the entire Hannibal franchise, so it's got to get at least this honorable mention here in 2002. As we move on to another honorable mention from the year 2002, a comedy horror film, Bubba Hotep. And ladies and gents, I talked earlier about movies being a mind fuck or a trip or however you want to say them. This one's a trip. It really is. As you can see up here, you have JFK and Elvis are the characters in this film, taking on the corpse of a reanimated mummy. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it's Bruce Campbell Camp at its best. If you haven't seen this one, give it a watch. Very entertaining, very funny, very scary. Check it out. Bubba Hotep. Gotta love it. As we move on to another, I believe this is the final honorable mention of the year, 2002. So this one for me, and I got to tell you, I do like Cabin Fever a great deal, actually. There are some issues I think I have with this movie overall, but I think, honestly, what you get, you're always going to have your pros and cons with any movie. I think the pros outweigh the cons in this one. This is one I don't think they ever really kind of replicated again in the franchise to really get this good. But this movie's crazy. It's very, it kind of borders on that Rob Zombie level of trash, if you get what I'm saying here. I don't think it ever quite makes that leap into Rob Zombie verse white trash, but it comes very close. It flirts with it. Let's say that. Man, what a crazy movie. You don't see like the flesh-eating virus type horror film as much as maybe you used to years ago. So this one's kind of an anomaly in its era, and I love it. Of course, the very famous shaving scene, a part of this one. Just crazy shit in this movie. Like one character pouring Listerine on his penis after he had sex, I guess thinking that, that was going to cure whatever he just stuck his dick into. Hey, buddy, if you really feel like she's carrying some diseases, how about not put your penis in there? That would be a great idea. There's a kid with a mullet that yells about pancakes while giving out roundhouse kicks. It's a trip. But yeah, it's my last honorable mention for the year 2002. As we move on to my pick for movie of the year from 2002. That's right. We're talking about Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later. And man, this one's really cool. Like, even down to the way they filmed this thing, it looks really gritty. It looks it doesn't really feel like a movie, I guess is the best way to put it. And I know they filmed this thing a little differently than most Hollywood movies are filmed. I think they filmed on some hand cams and things of that nature. But man, the zombies in this one are they're fast, they're vicious, they're much more imposing than the zombies you may have seen from Romero films and things of that nature, where you kind of have to rely on a group of them coming together to be a real threat. Like 28 Days Later and the remake of Dawn of the Dead, these things are fast. They're coming at you. A single zombie is a threat, and I think that really ups the ante a lot in this film. And I I can't say enough good about this movie. I really enjoy it. This is another one I don't want to say too much about, even though it is my pick for 2002, because in the off chance there are some horror fans or even just cinema fans who haven't seen this thing, I highly suggest you go check it out. It's very scary, and just a really interesting ride from beginning to end. So let's go ahead and move into the year 2003. We're going to talk about an honorable mention, a little film by the name of Darkness Falls. Now, I am not a fan of PG-13 horror. Never really have been. I don't think I ever really will be. But with that said, this is one movie that is definitely the exception to that rule that I've set for myself. I very much enjoy Darkness Falls. The whole Tooth Fairy story, pretty interesting. Hadn't really seen that done, especially to this degree. I love the imagery in this movie. I love the artwork, as you can kind of tell from this poster that I've selected here. Just really good stuff. I know there were some issues with the Tooth Fairy, the monster in this film, but I honestly really ended up enjoying the look of the Tooth Fairy in this movie. It's a shame, and I apologize, but his name eludes me at the moment. But the lead male character in this film passed away a number of years ago, which really sucks because I would have loved to have seen a follow up to this movie with the character of Kyle involved. But yeah, just a really good movie. Like I said, it's a PG-13 horror flick, but I think of every PG-13 horror flick I've seen, this one was the most effective. So yeah, definitely going to be an honorable mention for 2003. As we move on to another honorable mention, Rob Zombie's directorial debut, House of 1,000 Corpses. Now, I think Rob Zombie's best work really came from the Firefly franchise. When I say that, I mean House of 1,000 Corpses, The Devil's Rejects, and even though I like the characters from those movies, I'm really not a big fan of 3 from Hell. I guess I'll take it, but it really didn't live up to House and especially The Devil's Rejects, which in my opinion is Rob's magnum opus. Like that's the ending to that film. Holy shit. But we'll get there later. House of 1,000 Corpses was a return to that 70s grimy, trashy, gross horror, and it really worked for me. Really enjoyed it. The movie is just it's fucking psychedelically odd, and I love that. Just really take no prisoners, brutal type of film as well. You really can't see where this thing is going. There's just kind of when you think you've got the plot and whatnot figured out, they kind of change it and do something different. So yeah, definitely had to be at least an honorable mention here for the year 2003. As we move on, folks, to another honorable mention from 2003. The third and final honorable mention that is from this year is Freddy versus Jason. Now, hey, I already hear some of you out there saying, Brand, this movie's garbage. I agree. This is not a well-made film. This is not a good film. But this is two of the biggest slasher icons in history. A project that was over a decade in the making finally comes together, and for better or for worse, you get to see what you asked for, which is the title of the film, Freddy vs. Jason. And I got to tell you, this movie's got a lot of flaws on several different levels. But at the end of the day, I like it. It's nothing. I'm not going to sit here and try to defend some of the decisions that Ronnie Yu made as the director in this film. I'm not going to sit here and try and defend the acting in this film, which can be and is at certain points in time extremely gross. And I'm not even going to mention like a lot of the things that this film has been canceled about a little bit more recently, I suppose, like Kelly Rowland's line. What I will mention, at the end of the day, I just like the movie. I do. I know it's not good, like objectively not good, but I just like it. And I think that most slasher fans kind of deep down feel that way. Feel free to hate me down below in the comments, but that's kind of how I feel about it. As we move on to the film of the year in the horror genre for the year 2003, ladies and gents, I'm talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it is the remake from Marcus Nispel, I believe. Probably one of the better remakes in the horror genre ever. Not that I would say this film is up there with John Carpenter's The Thing, but when you're talking about just amazing remakes, you have to put this one into contention as well, if you ask me. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise has been very up and down. Down more recently with the last several films, in my opinion. But there's one thing they have, and they can say that a lot of other horror franchises, a lot of slasher franchises can't say, which is they have an honest-to-goodness, really well-done remake. So, yes, there's no question for me. This is movie of the year in the horror genre for the year 2003. I absolutely love it. Jessica Biel, amazing. I mean, holy crap. This movie was so good. They made a prequel of a remake, and it was still tolerable. I got to tell you, hey, maybe some of that came from the strength of this film right here. So there it is, my pick, 2003 Best Horror Film of the Year. Let's jump into some honorable mentions for 2004. This one pains me to put it as an honorable mention. I just talked about this film earlier when I was mentioning 28 Days Later, how the zombies really feel like a threat even one-on-one in this film. And I can kind of also mention about how this definitely also, just like Texas Chainsaw from the last slide, this movie has to be on the list of the greatest horror remakes of all time as well. I love the original Dawn of the Dead, but man, holy shit, does this one give the original a run for its money? And that is something that you will rarely, if ever, hear me say. I absolutely love this remake. Fantastic job on this one. Even from the opening of this movie all the way to the end, I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm hooked. I'm there in this world. And that's one of the things that's really hard to come by. And I absolutely love it. Pains me to put it as an honorable mention. But unfortunately, I got to do what I got to do. So you're going to talk about Dawn of the Dead. You got to mention Shaun of the Dead. Another honorable mention for the year 2004. This to me, I got to tell you, I like it more. I think I may like this movie just as much, if not more, than Zombieland, which was a bigger hit. But man, I got to tell you, as far as comedy horror goes, this is one of my absolute favorite horror comedy films, not just of the 2000s, but of all time. Maybe I'll also say less about this one, because this one also kind of feels like maybe some people that watch this channel have missed it. And if by some chance you haven't seen Shaun of the Dead yet, man, get out there, check it out. And if you have seen Shaun of the Dead, watch it again. Watch the whole Cornetto trilogy while you're at it. But I'll move on here to, ladies and gents, my pick for the 2004 horror film of the year goes to the very first installment in a very long-running franchise. I'm talking about Saw. People talk about this one. A lot of people say they prefer sequels over this original. And, I kind of understand that sentiment. But I got to say, this one comes from a place of nostalgia, and it comes from a place of a comfort movie. I mean, this movie, I remember being so downtrodden so sad in my life at the point when this movie came out. And I remember a friend of mine came over and he had 2 films that he had rented from Blockbuster, which, kind of dates me. And one was Napoleon Dynamite, which he insisted we watch first because he thought it was hilarious. And the second film was this, Saw. And I fell in love, and it really helped pick me up from a bad part in my life. So I know a lot of it has to do with that. I fully admit that. But I got to tell you, I don't care if the acting is subpar. I don't care. Whatever negative you may have about this film completely bounces off me. I love Saw, and the original is one of, if not my absolute favorite. So it's got to be my pick for the best horror film of the year 2004. Let's move on to 2005. We're halfway through the decade now, folks. We got some honorable mentions in this year we're going to talk about. Now, here's another one that also pains me to put it as an honorable mention, because I got to tell you, this movie right here, The Descent, is another much in the same vein of Ginger Snaps that I slept on for a long time. Now, this movie came out in 2005, mind you. I did not watch this film until earlier this year, here in 2021. And holy shit, was I kicking myself in the ass. Very upset with myself for not checking out this movie because it is so damn good. Especially now with, like, you see so many people, like, in real life disappearing, out of these national parks and trails and things, and the cave systems, and, TikTok blowing up about skinwalkers, which, to be honest, I think the antagonists in this film do kind of resemble what the description of a skinwalker would be. So I don't know if they were going for that. I have no clue. What I do know is that this movie is legitimately frightening, especially if you're claustrophobic. It's an all-female cast. They knock the ball out of the park. Absolutely amazing. If you haven't seen it yet, the fuck are you doing with your life? And that's an honorable mention from 2005. Let's move on here to another honorable mention. Is, hey, you know what? Saw wins movie of the year for me in 2004. And Saw 2 is a surefire honorable mention for the year 2005. I really love this franchise. I'm not, there's no bones about it. There's only maybe 1 or 2 entries in this franchise that I'm not really a huge fan of, out of a franchise that's got like 9 movies at this point. So, hey, honestly, not that bad. But I do enjoy Saw 2. I think they really took it up a notch. I love the addition of Amanda to a more prominent role. We'll say that in the franchise. And yeah, it's just really good. It does have a bit of a different feel than the original for, obvious reasons. A lot having to do with the cast and crew, but it does at the same time, I think, manage to recapture enough of that feeling, and certainly does a very good job of carrying on a story that, I mean, especially if you're looking at it from the perspective of just John Kramer, I mean, not much, if anything at all, is known about this guy after the first movie. So I always give Saw 2 a lot of credit for establishing a lot of the mythology behind the franchise, even more so than the first one did. So yeah, let's move on here. And this is my final honorable mention for the year 2005. This is Feast. And get the kids out of the room before you watch this one. Holy shit. This is a crazy movie. It actually spawned a trilogy of films. And I don't remember. I want to say it was like Project Greenlight maybe was the show. And I think Wes Craven was involved. And this is the film, or the filmmakers won that season and made this movie, Feast. You know what? This is a very unpredictable film. They really set up characters. They don't just, I shouldn't even say set them up. They blatantly tell you, hey, this is your hero. And then the next second, they're fucking dead. Okay? These creatures are bonkers. And it's another one that I feel like people may have not seen. So I'm going to leave it at that. Check out Feast if you haven't already. And finally, my pick for the best film of the year 2005 has to go to The Devil's Rejects. This, like I said earlier, in my opinion, this is the best film that Rob Zombie has ever made in his entire career. And, no shade to Rob, but I don't see him making another film that matches this. It's brutal. It pulls no punches. It holds no prisoners. And it is really the three core best members of the Firefly family doing their thing on the road. It's like taking everything that was really good about House of a Thousand Corpses, moving it to a new film, putting it on steroids, and letting it go. And I absolutely love this movie. And it has one of the best endings in the history of not just horror history, but cinema history. When Freebird kicks on and they go into their last couple of reels of the film. I'm trying not to spoil too much. Oh, wow, chef's kiss. Amazing. Immaculate. If Rob Zombie could make every movie with the level of skill that he made The Devil's Rejects with, I think people would have a vastly different opinion about his filmmaking ability, his talent in general. This is just a great movie. So it is my pick. Best horror movie of the year, 2005. Let's move on to 2006, and we'll start off here with Hatchet, an honorable mention, a damn fine honorable mention as well, because this was kind of around the time where, all of your old favorite horror or slasher icons had kind of retired. They were remaking these movies, or making weird loose sequels, or whatever. Hatchet comes around and gives us a brand new slasher icon, and also portrayed by Kane Hodder, who portrayed Jason in 4 movies, more than anybody else. And it does, like, you'll see Tony Todd in this thing, and later on you'll see Danielle Harris in some of the subsequent sequels. This whole franchise was really kind of about respecting horror and slasher horrors past while embracing something new. So I really enjoy it. And honorable mention for 2006 right there. As we move on to, I think I'm seeing a pattern here, aren't you? Another honorable mention for the year 2006 here. I am talking about Saw 3. Now, I do love, like I said, I really enjoy the Saw franchise. I've enjoyed the vast majority of them, and 3 is no different. I really like 3. In the same vein, I feel like the first 3 Saw movies, even though they all have the same central plot, they all feel like different movies. They feel like different properties to a certain degree. And that's something I really enjoy about these movies, especially the first 3. The original trilogy kind of give me that vibe. But man, I got to tell you, taking it up a notch with what they had already established in the first 2 films, a very unexpected ending with some antagonists going the wayside, setting the way for Hoffman, who I feel was the most brutal of the Jigsaw accomplices, more brutal than Jigsaw himself, in my opinion. Just really good stuff. But yeah, there's another honorable mention as we move into one last honorable mention for the year 2006. I'm talking about The Hills Have Eyes. And yes, this is the remake, of course, 2006. The Hills Have Eyes is one of those movies that can be uncomfortable at times. I talk about the original and this one. There are certain points in the movie that are a little bit uncomfortable, but I think that it really, in doing so, you really make these antagonists, you want to see them get their comeuppance, and you really root for the protagonist in this as a result of those things. So yeah, I enjoyed this one. I really liked the original, but I thought that this was a solid remake. And from the year of 2006, I feel like this one holds up and definitely deserves a spot as an honorable mention. So let's check out the movie of the year, folks, for the year 2006. I am talking about an underrated classic, in my opinion. Absolutely love this movie. We're talking Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. And I mentioned earlier about how Hatchet, the same year, was really trying to honor past slashers and that subgenre while doing something new. This movie does the exact same thing, and it does it better, in my opinion. You have Robert Englund, of course, Freddy Krueger, Scott Wilson, who, done so many things, but most people probably remember him from The Walking Dead. Zelda Rubinstein here from Poltergeist. Just, bringing back a lot of horror royalty and doing something that I kind of call it almost like Scream meets the Blair Witch Project. And maybe that's why I like it so much. Because those are two of my favorite films right there in and of themselves. But yeah, this, for me, there's no question, definitely the best horror film of the year 2006. This is another one. I feel like I know a lot of horror fans have seen this one, and most that I've spoken to really appreciate it. But if there's anyone out there listening that hasn't seen this one, check it out, man. I got to tell you, will not be disappointed whatsoever. And that's why it's my pick. Best horror film of the year, 2006. So, moving on to 2007 here, folks. We got another Rob Zombie film as an honorable mention. I'm talking about his remake of the John Carpenter classic, Halloween. Now, you're not going to see Halloween 2 from Rob Zombie on this list, even though it did come out in 2009. You're not going to see that one on here, but I think there is, I think if you look at the year 2007, at least in my opinion, maybe it's because I'm a huge Halloween fan, this one, it makes the cut as an honorable mention. I'm not a huge fan of what Rob Zombie did with the Halloween movies, but I do definitely appreciate this one way more than I did the second one. Michael's a little too big in this one for my taste. The whole prequel slash remake element, I appreciated, but at the same time, man, I don't really want Michael's backstory. And if you're going to give it to me, can it not be cookie cutter bullshit like his parents were mean? I have gripes with the film, but I think overall, other than The Devil's Rejects, this may be Rob's second best film. Maybe some contention there, in my opinion, with like 31 or House of a Thousand Corpses. But at the end of the day, it deserves an honorable mention for the year 2007. And regardless of what I say now, I was super hyped to see this thing back in 2007. So we'll move on here to another honorable mention for that very same year of 2007. Of course, we're talking about Paranormal Activity. And this is one that I had some animosity towards at first, because this was the franchise that kind of eventually knocked Saw off that pedestal by doing the same thing that it was doing. But their initial outing, I felt, was extremely well done, simple, but effective. Didn't cost much to make, but made a lot of money. And I think for a lot of the same reasons that I really like the Blair Witch Project, I think this one's pretty good too. I think the Blair Witch Project one-ups this film because it did less is more. And I think in found footage, the less of the less is more of the more, if that makes any sense. I don't know, that sounded dumb. But I feel like, whereas Blair Witch didn't even try to give you like a, the ending in this film does, where, dude gets like air punched across a fucking room or whatever. Blair Witch kind of went a little bit more subtle. And I feel like maybe if Paranormal Activity had done that, I think it would have been a little bit more effective. But hey, you're dealing with a new generation, a new crowd. I get it. And I feel like at the end of the day, this definitely deserves an honorable mention. All right, so another honorable mention for the year 2007 here. Of course, we're talking about Saw 4. Now, I think up until this point, I've had every single solitary Saw film on this list as the best movie or an honorable mention. That definitely falls off after Saw 4. But man, spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen Saw 4. Go ahead and skip like 15, 20 seconds into this video. But this, Jigsaw dying at the end of 3, and this movie remedying that to a degree by having the events of this film take place at the same time as 3, fucking genius. Let's be real with ourselves. And I really feel like, I talked earlier about the original trilogy being really good. I mean, in all honesty, this one isn't far away from the first 3 in terms of quality and in terms of just enjoyability. As we move on here to my top favorite film in the horror genre of the year 2007, we're talking about Stephen King's The Mist. Of course, written for the screen and directed by Frank Darabont, who you probably have heard from The Walking Dead. There's some Walking Dead actors and actresses in this film. But this is a heartbreaking movie, especially the ending. Very intriguing movie. You're never really too sure what's going on. You kind of see the different personality types once the shit hits the fan, so to speak, and theories, and it just really feels real to a degree. As far as the human characters, they feel real. They feel kind of fleshed out, even though they're maybe not so important. I guess that makes sense. But the biggest thing about this one, and I won't speak on it, I know it's been memed, I know people talk about it, but once again, if this is one that people haven't seen, go check it out. The ending is heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. But it's definitely got to be my favorite film of the year 2007. So let's move on to 2008, an honorable mention here. This one is Repo, the Genetic Opera. Now, this is one that I don't hear a lot of people talk about. Not to say that it's not, it says it at the bottom, an instant cult classic, and I honestly believe that came to fruition. Directed by Darren Lynn Bousman, who you'll also note has directed a lot of those Saw movies that I've had on this list as well. But if you look up at the top here of the people who are in it, especially Bill Moseley comes to mind. I'm a real big fan of his work. But it is a horror musical in a dystopian future, and it's goddamn, it's just really good. And I kind of mentioned earlier, I feel like maybe people haven't seen this one. The less said, the better. Mum's the word. Check it out. There's a reason it's an honorable mention for the year 2008. It's good, folks. All right, and here is another honorable mention for the year 2008. My second and final honorable mention for this year is Cloverfield. Now, this is one that also spawned into a franchise that is all over the place. But I will say this, even though it's all over the place, it's definitely one that keeps me coming back to check it out. Now, I've been hearing recently that there's going to be a direct sequel to this original Cloverfield, which, if that's the case, I'm all for it. This movie kind of brings like the kaiju monster to America. You know what I'm saying? Like your Godzillas or Gameras or things of this nature. And there's never really 100% clear explanation as to why this happens or what happened. And there's even some things in this movie that you think are the case that in later on Cloverfield movies, you find out maybe that wasn't the case, but it's kind of hard to tell because fuck it, watch it. If you haven't seen it, go watch it, folks. I'm telling you. And don't just watch Cloverfield. Watch 10 Cloverfield Lane, watch the Cloverfield Paradox. These are really interesting and entertaining movies. But if you're a fan of like the Japanese kaiju monster movies, you'll probably enjoy this one. It's essentially a found footage take on that type of film. So we'll move on here to my favorite horror film of the year 2008. Of course, we're talking about The Strangers. And this one's another one that works for me because it's just simple yet effective. It really is. At the end of the day, of course, you got Liv Tyler starring in this thing. It's simple, very effective. Less is more. There's really not a whole lot to say about this movie. Honestly, at the end of the day, it's just something that works well. And I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. I do know it's got a sequel. And I've seen bits and pieces of the sequel. And I've heard a lot of people kind of bounce around. Is it good? Is it not good? Blah, blah, blah. When it comes to the original, most people that I've heard discuss this film enjoy it. And, simplicity really does get the ball rolling. And it just works in a lot of ways with this film. So for me, it's the best film in the horror genre in 2008. We've got one more year to go, folks. Let's hop right on in. So an honorable mention for the year 2009, of course, we have The Collector, aka Saw Zero. So yet another quasi-Saw movie making the cut here. The Collector is just really good. You've got a badass antagonist. You've got a protagonist that, I mean, in this movie and also in The Collection becomes really badass. A really cool story between those two characters. I think this was originally written as a prequel to Saw, which is why a lot of people have codenamed it Saw Zero. And in some aspects it shows, even though it was clearly rewritten to be another property, there are certain things that you kind of show through, and maybe that's why I enjoy it so much. Here's to hoping that that Collector 3 finally gets off its ass and does something. Developmental hell for that one that I hope it comes to an end, because I would like to see where this story goes in the future. But it is an honorable mention for me in 2009. As we move on here to another honorable mention from the year 2009, this is Laid to Rest. Now, this is one that did have a sequel entitled Chrome Skull, Laid to Rest 2. But I don't hear a lot of people talk about this movie. Sure, every once in a while you'll hear someone bring it up, but as far as like, I hang out in horror movie circles, this one doesn't come up an awful lot. And I feel like it probably should. So for me, if you're looking for a really cool, maybe a unique slasher that you haven't seen 1,000 times, it's not Freddy, not Jason, not Michael, not Chucky, not whoever, check out old Chrome Skull here, because Laid to Rest is a very interesting, very bloody and violent, and very entertaining film. And that's why it is definitely an honorable mention for 2009. And speaking of, my final honorable mention for the year 2009 is another film they're currently working on a prequel, I believe, to Orphan. And I mean, this one, a lot of it comes down to the big reveal at the end. Classic reveal. This movie gave me a lot of Good Son vibes, and I'm a big fan of that one. But it's just overall, this is just it's a different type of horror film that I really wasn't used to seeing, especially around this time in 2009. So it definitely deserves an honorable mention. But ladies and gents, what is Fran's pick? Best horror film of the year 2009 to end this video. It's got to be Zombieland, people. I mentioned earlier I've got an affinity for these zombie comedy movies with Shaun of the Dead. I also really do enjoy Zombieland. And when you look at the year 2009, I don't think anything else really comes as close to being entertaining and just an all-around good time and good film, good experience as Zombieland does. Just an amazing cast with, Jesse Eisenberg, Emma Stone, Woody Harrelson, of course. Just a really good cast, a really cool take on the whole zombie subgenre. And it's just good stuff. It's a good time. It's kind of a comfort movie for a lot of people that I talk to. And it even spawned a really good sequel that came out a couple of years ago. So, as per usual, this movie was actually pretty big. So I doubt that you missed this one, but if you have, check it out, folks. Really good movie. And it is my pick for the best horror of 2009. So, there we have it. We've made it through another decade. Best horror of the 2000s. Like I said at the beginning of the video, though, I want to know what you all think. Let me know. Do you agree or disagree with my list? What are your picks for the best horror of the 2000s? And yeah, the 80s are down, the 90s are down, the 2000s are down. Just to let everyone know, next up will be the 2010s, and then I'm going to start going backwards. 70s, 60s. We're going to see how long I can drag this out. So yeah, I appreciate everyone stopping by and listening. If you're a fan of this, I do appreciate that as well, because this is something I really enjoy doing. And yeah, I guess with that said, we've ran a little long here. It's been damn near an hour talking about the best movies of this decade. So with that said, I'm Brand from Bloody Breakdown. You guys know what to do. Give it a like, subscribe, become a member, share me out, all that stuff. Leave me some comments down below. Yeah. So I'm Brand from Bloody Breakdown. Really thoroughly enjoyed this. Hoping you all did too. I'll catch you all next time.